Hey guys, so this is something a bit different. It's not about old TV. It's not about TV at all, but it does have to do with the history of Philadelphia. It's the first time I'm attempting something like this, so please let me know if you like it. Thanks. Today, I'd like to talk about Mac. No, not that one. Not that one either. What else could I mean, you might ask? Or you might not. If you've lived in the mid Atlantic, especially the Philadelphia area, in the 90s or earlier, when I was vacationing in the Poconos earlier this summer, at the entrance to the sleepy town of Matamoros, I saw something interesting. No, it's not the laughable Gateway to Pennsylvania sign. It's the MAC, Money Access Center logo on the closed down Sovereign Bank branch. Obviously, this particular Mac machine has not been operational for a while, but it got me thinking. Those used to be ubiquitous, but no longer exist. How did I not notice? Maybe I should start at the beginning. Although our story begins in Philadelphia, first, some prehistory. The first ATM was built for Barclays in London in 1967. Philadelphia was actually the first to order the same type of ATM that same year. Then came DocuTel, which built its own ATM, the DocuTeller, in the United States, and Chemical Bank in New York, now Chase, was the first to install a DocuTeller. The DocuTeller had 80% of the ATM market, but then its fortunes changed. This isn't the story about the rise and fall of DocuTel, however, or even about ATMs in general. It's the story of the ATM network, one in particular, in Philadelphia. It was the late 1970s, and two banks were battling to get their networks online first. The first was Girard Bank. Yes, it is that old and important. And no, it no longer exists. But Girard Bank championed their George system in 1978. But the Philadelphia National Bank, just as old and important, rushed its offering to market to compete with George. And in 1979, it lined up support from 13 other financial institutions to launch the Money Access Center, MAC. George never caught on, and when Girard Bank was bought out by Mellon in 1983, it joined the MAC system as well. Later, Mellon's retail banking division became Citizens Bank. The Philadelphia National Bank, though, went through its own dizzying parade of acquisitions and mergers, becoming core states, then First Union, then Wachovia, and finally Wells Fargo. But back to the Mac. Remember, these weren't the debit cards we use today. They were ATM cards only. But in this area, nobody used the word ATM. Oh, it existed, having been coined in 1974. But Mac went all in on branding. These were not ATMs. They were Mac machines. And you didn't use an ATM card. You used a Mac card. The terms were pushed by the banks that were part of Mac and really caught on in the region. You didn't get cash from an ATM. You tapped Mac. Mac grew very quickly. By the end of the 1980s, it was the second biggest regional ATM network, behind New York Cash Exchange. Nice. In 1992, core states spun off the MAC network into a subsidiary called Electronic Payment Services, EPS. Core states kept a stake in the company, but was joined by Bank One, with a C, of Columbus, PNC, and Society Corporation of Cleveland. By the end of the decade, Mac operated 13,000 Mac machines for 1,400 banks in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, West Virginia, and Ohio. The network continued to grow through the 90s. It added more partners. It was now co-owned by First Union, Bank One, now with a K, PNC, KeyCorp, which joined on its own before acquiring Society, and National City Corporation of Cleveland. It added Michigan, Indiana, Kentucky, and Maryland to the states served directly by its Mac machines. It also drove 32,000 ATMs in all 50 states, with 1.5 billion transactions annually. But by now, ATM cards were no longer ATM cards. They were debit cards attached to the issuing bank, and Mac was just the network. It was not the brand you saw on the front of the card or on the top of the ATM anymore. It was a little icon you saw on the back of the card and on the bottom of the ATM, if at all. And besides, all debit cards were Visas or MasterCards, and those worked with just about any ATM. The only reason you might still care about the network was to stay away from surcharges when using the ATM. But having the same network didn't guarantee a free ATM. Very often, you'd need to be using an ATM from your own bank. Still, in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and much of the region, Mac reigned supreme. Still, EPS wanted more. They wanted a publicly traded company, either by going public themselves or by being acquired by a public company. And in 1999, they found a buyer. Concord EFS, Incorporated in Memphis, Tennessee, acquired EPS for $920 million. Concord didn't stop acquisitions with Mac. In 2000, it acquired an equally iconic Chicago-based brand, Cash Station, also founded in 1979. And in 2001, they acquired an even bigger ATM network, Star Payment Systems Incorporated, founded in 1987. What all these acquisitions meant was that it was time to consolidate. Concord didn't really want three different identities for its nationwide network. In their press release about the acquisition of Star, Concord also announced that all Mac and cash station machines and all Mac and cash station insignia everywhere would be rebranded to Star over the course of a few years due to better national brand recognition. Of course, some of these rebrandings were skin deep, at least initially, but eventually the networks would be merged. The little icon on the debit card and on the ATM changed from Mac to Star, and most people didn't even notice. In 2004, Concord itself was acquired by Atlanta-based First Data, and then by Wisconsin-based Fiserv in 2019. But Star is still the Star, and Mac is largely forgotten. But old-timers in Philadelphia, where it all began, don't care. A few prominent Mac labels did survive the rebranding, as seen in this news story about the recent ATM bombing. But more importantly, it lives on in their hearts and in their speech. They still take out their Mac cards to tap Mac, even if that's not what it says on the cards or the ATMs themselves. Thank you for watching, and please comment and let me know if you've liked the video.